I was 34 years old when I realized the man who taught me how to protect my money was the exact monster who would steal $155 420.85 of it in the dead of night. Living out the absolute nightmare, I opened my banking app expecting to see the down payment for my dream home, only to be punched in the throat by a single glowing digit: 0. 6 years of absolute starvation and sacrifice had been wiped out by a single trusted device, my own father's iPad. When I confronted him, he didn't apologize or show an ounce of remorse. He coldly declared that my golden child brother needed my life savings to pay off loan sharks, and that I should just earn it back. He thought he had successfully audited my life, but he forgot one incredibly dangerous detail. I am a senior data analyst, and I know exactly how to weaponize a digital footprint to lock a thief in a federal cage. Before I show you how I used his own arrogance to snap handcuffs on his wrists in front of 55 of his closest friends, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me down in the comments where in the world are you watching from. Let me take you back to the freezing bank office where the first trap was set. I was 18 years old, gripping a cheap plastic folder filled with my first real paychecks from a grueling summer job. The heavy glass doors of the regional bank clicked shut behind me, sealing out the hot Austin, Texas sun. The air conditioning inside was freezing, making the sweat on my arms turn to ice. My father, William Bennett, walked ahead of me. He didn't walk like a normal person. He marched. For 34 years he had been the branch manager here. He wore a crisp navy suit, and every teller we passed sat up a little straighter, their smiles tight and nervous as we moved past their windows. "Come on, Chloe. Keep up," he snapped softly, not looking back. He was a man made of numbers, systems, and absolute control. I hurried to catch up, my cheap sneakers squeaking on the polished marble floor. I was always the reliable one, the workhorse, the girl who studied until midnight to keep her academic scholarships so her parents wouldn't have to spend a dime on her. My younger brother Mason was 3 years behind me, probably sitting at home playing video games. My mother Susan constantly smoothed Mason's collar and told him how hard the world was for men. My parents had decided early on that Mason was the investment. He had potential. I was just the machinery that kept the family running. Dad guided me into his large corner office and pointed to the heavy leather chair opposite his mahogany desk. "Sit." I sat down, feeling instantly small. He pulled a stack of thick paperwork from his drawer and slid it across the shiny wood toward me. "You are an adult now," he said. His banker's voice was calm, authoritative, and left absolutely no room for an argument. "It's time you had a real checking account. I'm adding my name to this as a joint owner." I looked at the thick black C where I was supposed to sign. A weird cold knot formed in my stomach. I looked up at him. "Why does your name need to be on it, Dad? I'm making my own money now. I can handle it." His eyes narrowed just a fraction. It was a tiny shift, a micro-expression I would later learn to recognize in my career as a senior data analyst, a warning sign that the data was about to turn against you. But back then I just thought I had disappointed him. "Chloe," he said, leaning forward and folding his hands together tightly, "do you know how the world works? It is full of risks, fraud, emergencies. If something happens to you, I need to be able to step in and manage your finances. Family takes care of family. Do you understand? Family comes first," I repeated automatically. It was the rule stitched into every holiday dinner, every speech, every guilt-laden phone call from my mother. Blood is thicker than water. It sounded like love when they said it. "Exactly." Dad smiled, but the smile didn't reach his cold eyes. "I have 30 years of banking experience. I am protecting you. Sign the paper." I picked up the heavy metal pen from his desk. My hand hovered over the dotted line. Today my whole life is about finding patterns. Numbers don't lie. Numbers don't gaslight you. But that day sitting in that freezing office, I couldn't see the pattern. I didn't see that every time my mother praised me for being the easy child, or every time they told me my needs were secondary to Mason's, it was a careful setup. I was being groomed. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed away my financial freedom. "Good girl," Dad said. He slipped the paper away the exact second my pen lifted. He didn't say thank you. He just filed it in a heavy steel cabinet and locked it with a sharp, echoing click. I didn't know it then, but I had just handed him the keys to my future. I was being prepared for my role as the family ATM, and the extractions were about to begin. The rain was lashing against the thick, storm-proof glass of my 12th floor office at Omnitech when the true bleeding began. It was a Tuesday in late 2018. I was 26, freshly promoted to a senior data analyst role. For the first time in my life, I had a real salary. I had a tiny spark of hope that my future belonged to me. Then my cell phone vibrated across my desk. vibrating against a stack of performance reports. "Mom," I answered quickly, keeping my voice low so my new coworkers wouldn't hear. "Hey Mom, I'm in the middle of a quarter-end review. Is everything okay?" "Chloe, thank God," she gasped. The raw panic in her voice was so sharp it made my chest physically tighten. "The roof, Chloe. It's leaking everywhere. It's in the walls. The contractor just left. He says it's toxic black mold spreading through the vents." Dad can't stop coughing. I'm so scared. I gripped the edge of my desk, my analytical mind immediately trying to solve the problem. "Okay, Mom. Calm down. Call the home insurance. They have emergency clauses for this." There was a heavy, unnatural pause on the line, the kind of silence that swallows the air in a room. "We can't, sweetheart." My father's voice suddenly cut in. He must have been listening on the other line. His tone was perfectly measured, heavily weighed down with a manufactured exhaustion. "The deductible is too high, and my pension just isn't stretching the way we hoped this month. We don't have the cash for the repairs. We might have to take out a high-interest loan against the house." My heart hammered against my ribs. My parents, the people who had raised me, were living in a toxic house. The ingrained programming kicked in instantly, overriding every logical circuit in my brain. Family takes care of family. "How much is it?" I whispered. 18,000. Dad sighed, a sound designed to make me feel responsible. "I hate to even tell you that number. I'm failing your mother." I panicked for them. My hands shook as I opened my banking portal right there at my work desk. With 3 rapid clicks, I wired $18,000 directly to their joint account. It wiped out almost every single dollar of my early savings. When I told my mother the transfer was complete, her tears stopped instantly. She called me her guardian angel, and hung up. That night, I sat alone in my dark, drafty apartment. The silence was deafening. I opened my laptop, the blue light reflecting in my tired eyes, and created a new spreadsheet. I am a data analyst. It is an occupational hazard. When the world feels out of control, I track things. I named the file Ledger. I typed the date, the amount, and color-coded the cell a bright, alarming red. I didn't know it then, but that spreadsheet would become the map of my destruction. Between 2019 and 2022, the red cells multiplied. My brother Mason's college tuition kept coming up short. He lost his partial athletic scholarship because he skipped classes to go to parties. I remember the night Mom called me, hyperventilating so hard I thought she was having a heart attack. "He's going to be ruined, Chloe," she wailed, sobbing into the phone for 3 agonizing hours. "If he drops out, he'll be working at a fast food joint for the rest of his life. The world is too hard. He needs this degree. He's a man, he has to provide someday." I looked around my tiny apartment. I was eating 90-cent ramen noodles. My work shoes had a hole in the sole that I had patched with black electrical tape. I didn't say a word about my own struggles. I just kept transferring the money. 5,000 here, 7,000 there. I covered $32,000 in tuition gaps over 4 years. I didn't buy a new coat for 3 winters. In 2021, the calls took a darker turn. Mom was diagnosed with severe rheumatoid arthritis. The insurance refused to cover the specific, high-end biological treatments her specialist recommended. Dad called me late at night, his voice cracking. "We are drowning, Chloe," he said, sounding like a broken old man. "I might have to take out a second mortgage just to keep her out of a wheelchair." I didn't hesitate. I paid $14,000 directly to the medical clinic. I told myself it was for her health. I told myself it was the right thing to do. Then came 2023. Mason called me. He sounded entirely different. Confident, slick, like a salesman who had already closed the deal. He had a can't-miss business opportunity. He was going to flip a property in East Austin. He just needed startup capital. "I swear on Grandma's grave, Chloe," Mason pleaded, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. 8 months. That's all I need. I'll pay you back the principal plus 10% interest. You'll actually make money on this. Come on, sis. Believe in me for once. I transferred $10,000. The flip failed miserably within weeks. He stopped answering my calls. For 3 months, my texts went to a dead zone. I never saw a single cent of that 10 grand again. Between 2024 and 2025, the requests mutated into micro-emergencies. A blown transmission on Mom's luxury SUV. Unexpected property tax hikes. Holiday catering bills they couldn't quite cover. Because, as Mom sharply reminded me, we have to keep up appearances for the neighbors, Chloe. What will people think if we scale back? Another $26,000 bled from me, piece by piece, death by 1,000 cuts. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the final tally at the bottom of my spreadsheet. Total, over $100,000. In 8 years. Over $100,000. I stared at the red numbers until my eyes burned. Data is comfort. Numbers don't lie. Numbers don't manipulate your emotions or use your childhood against you. I realized, sitting in that suffocating silence, that in all those years, for all that money, I had never received a single thank you card. Not one genuine expression of gratitude. Never an acknowledgement that I had sacrificed my own youth, my comfort, and my experiences. What I got instead was a cold, practiced dismissal. You have a good job, Chloe. You don't have a husband or kids to worry about. Family helps family. I was the family ATM. And Mason, who had squandered every opportunity handed to him, was still paraded around at every dinner as the golden child with so much potential. A dark, heavy resentment finally began to take root in my chest. And for the first time I decided to keep a secret of my own. Despite the massive financial wounds my family kept inflicting on me, I had a secret, a quiet, stubborn dream that kept my heart beating through every lonely 60-hour work week. While my coworkers went on group trips to Mexico and posted pictures of their shiny new cars, I stayed behind. I sat in my tiny, drafty apartment on the edge of the city. In the winter, the wind would rattle the cheap single-pane windows, making a high, whistling sound that reminded me of how entirely alone I was. I would wrap myself in a faded fleece blanket, open my laptop and stare at a different spreadsheet. I called it Project Escape. As a data analyst, you learn early on that to protect a system, you have to build a firewall. You have to isolate the variables that are draining your resources. My family was a corrupt variable. I couldn't stop them from asking, but I could build a hidden fortress where they couldn't reach everything. My dream wasn't a modern glass mansion. It was just a modest, craftsman-style house in the quiet suburbs of Austin. I wanted a backyard where I could plant blue hydrangeas. I wanted a living room big enough to finally host my own friends, instead of always being the guest. Most importantly, I wanted walls that belonged entirely to me. Walls where nobody could tell me I was selfish. Walls where nobody could demand a piece of me. I started saving with brutal discipline when I was 26. I set up automatic transfers the exact second my paycheck hit. I drove an 8-year-old Toyota that shuddered violently whenever I merged onto the highway. I stopped buying coffee from cafes, settling for the bitter, burnt taste of grocery store grounds brewed in a cheap plastic machine. Every time my friends invited me to a dinner party or a weekend trip, I practiced a tight, polite smile and said, "I'm just too busy with work this week." The truth was, the loneliness was aging me. I felt older than 34. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, hoarding every penny just to buy the right to finally exist. My goal was $180,000, a solid 20% down payment on an $850,000 house, plus closing costs and a safety net. After 6 years of saying no to myself over and over again, I reached $155,420.85. The money sat in a high-yield savings account at Lone Star Fidelity. I was so incredibly close I could practically smell the fresh paint. I had even started touring houses. The third one I saw was perfect. It had a wraparound porch, original oak hardwood floors that creaked warmly under my feet, and a kitchen bathed in golden southern sunlight. The asking price was $820,000. I had planned to make an official offer the week after my father's 65th birthday party. But here is the thing that makes my stomach turn into a cold, hard knot. 3 years before the disaster, I had a sudden moment of terrifying clarity. I was 31. I was sitting at my desk, running a security sweep on Omnitech's external servers, when a thought hit me like a physical punch to the chest. My father is still on my bank account. The joint account he forced me to open when I was 18 was still the main hub of my financial life. My high-yield savings was linked to it. I didn't wait. I grabbed my coat, left the office on my lunch break, and marched straight into a Lone Star Fidelity branch. The air conditioning hit me, freezing and sharp, instantly flashing me back to that day when I was 18. But this time I wasn't a scared girl in cheap sneakers. I sat down with a personal banker. "I need to sever a joint owner from my primary checking account," I said, my voice steady though my hands were sweating. "And I want to open a brand new high-yield savings account, entirely in my name. Solo, completely independent." The banker clicked his mouse, his eyes scanning my profile. "Are you sure, Ms. Bennett? Your father, William Bennett, has been linked to this for over a decade." "I'm sure," I said. "Cut the corrupt variable. Build the firewall. I signed the electronic pad. It was done. I breathed a sigh of relief so deep it made me dizzy. I knew my father would notice. He was a man who checked his banking portals the way normal people checked the weather. I just didn't expect how fast or how cold his reaction would be. He called me the very next morning at 7:15 a.m. "Chloe." His voice wasn't loud. It was unnervingly quiet. The kind of quiet that happens right before a thunderstorm breaks. "Hi, Dad. I was reviewing my portfolio this morning," he said slowly, deliberately drawing out the words. "Your checking account is no longer visible on my dashboard. Did you make an error with the app?" He knew it wasn't an error. He was testing me. He was waiting for me to apologize and fix it. "No, Dad," I said, staring blindly at my kitchen wall. "I'm 31. I decided it was time to separate my finances." I opened an individual account. The silence on the line was suffocating. I could hear him breathing. I could picture him sitting at his heavy mahogany desk, his knuckles turning white. "You removed me," he finally said, his voice dripping with a toxic, chilling venom. "You don't trust your own father? After everything I have done for you? After I taught you everything you know about money and survival?" "Dad, it's not about trust. It is entirely about trust," he snapped, the facade breaking. "I protected you. I managed this family's future. And you lock me out like a common thief? Like a stranger?" The ingrained programming flared up violently. My chest heaved, and hot tears spilled over my cheeks. I felt like a terrible, ungrateful daughter. I was a monster for wanting privacy. "I'm sorry, Dad. I really am, but I need to do this for me." "Selfish," he whispered. It sounded like a curse. "Just like your mother always said, when you actually need us, Chloe, don't come crying." He hung up. The click of the phone echoed in my quiet apartment. I sat down on the floor, wiping my tears, my heart pounding in my throat. I had survived the confrontation. I had stood my ground. The account was in my name only. I thought I had won. I thought I was finally safe. I vastly underestimated the man who raised me. I thought I was safe. I had built my firewall. I had severed the connection, but I had vastly underestimated my father. He hadn't just been a branch manager for 3 decades. He was a man who understood the fundamental architecture of banking systems, security protocols, and most dangerously, human vulnerabilities. He knew that the weakest link in any security system isn't the software, it's the user. My father's 65th birthday party was held on a Friday in early October at my parents' sprawling 2-story brick house in Round Rock. The Texas autumn air was crisp, carrying a slight dry chill, but inside the house it was suffocatingly warm. 30 guests filled the oversized living room and the manicured backyard. Aunts, uncles, cousins, old family friends, and neighbors who had known us for decades milled about, holding delicate plates. The decorations were extravagant: tall centerpieces of white lilies, silver-embossed napkins, and a hired string quartet playing softly in the corner. The food was high-end catering. Waiters in black vests carried silver trays of bacon-wrapped scallops and beef Wellington. Mason had paid for it. Or at least that was the story being aggressively circulated. Everyone was dressed beautifully, smiling and performing their roles perfectly. It was an elaborate, expensive stage play of the happy, functional Bennett family, and they had a captive audience. I sat in a high-backed armchair in the corner of the room, nursing a lukewarm glass of white wine. The condensation dripped onto my fingers, cold and grounding. I watched the room the way I watched a dataset, looking for anomalies. My father stood by the grand fireplace, tapping his crystal glass with a silver spoon. The room quieted down. "Family," he began, his voice projecting with the practiced ease of a man used to running boardrooms. "At 65, a man looks back at his life and asks what he leaves behind. The answer, of course, is legacy." He smiled, looking directly at my mother, who was gazing up at him with a terrifying, saintly devotion. "And my legacy is standing right here." He placed a heavy hand on Mason's shoulder. Mason grinned, wearing a suit that cost more than my first car. "Many of you know my son Mason," my father continued, his chest puffing out. "Our up-and-coming real estate titan. He's making waves in the Austin market. Hard work, grit, and the right investments. We are so incredibly proud of him." The room erupted in polite applause. No one mentioned that his last 3 property flips had ended in catastrophic, humiliating losses. No one mentioned the $10,000 of my money that was buried in his failures. As the applause died down, the usual suspects gravitated toward my dark corner. Cousin Sarah, wearing a diamond tennis bracelet she made sure to flash every time she took a sip of her drink, leaned over me. "Chloe, honey," she cooed, her eyes scanning my simple off-the-rack dress. Still renting that tiny apartment on the east side? Yes, Sarah. Still there, I said, offering a tight, perfectly practiced smile. No house yet? Uncle Robert chimed in, adjusting his tie. You're 34, Chloe. You really should start building equity. Renting is just throwing money into a furnace. Look at your brother. He's building an empire. I'll keep that in mind, Uncle Robert, I said. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just let the insults slide off me. Because beneath my cheap dress, I was wearing a suit of armor. I had a $155,000 secret sitting in a high-yield account, safely out of their reach. Let them have their theater. I was going to have my house. But as the night wore on, my analytical brain snagged on a jarring discrepancy. It was the energy between my father and Mason. It was completely wrong. Despite the celebratory mood, they weren't relaxing. They kept huddling together near the heavy glass patio doors, stepping slightly behind the heavy velvet curtains. I watched them over the rim of my wine glass. My father would lean in, whispering frantically, his face rigid with a barely contained aggressive tension. Mason looked physically ill. Despite the cool October air drafting in from the patio, a sheen of sweat coated Mason's forehead. He kept wiping his palms on his expensive trousers. Every few minutes, my father would stop talking, and both of their eyes would dart across the room directly to me. The moment they realized I was looking back, they would snap their heads away, plastering on fake smiles and laughing loudly at something neither of them had said. A cold prickle of unease started at the base of my neck. Something was happening. Something I wasn't supposed to see. The data was shifting, but I couldn't read the outcome. Before I could get up to investigate, a hand clamped down hard on my wrist. I jumped, spilling a drop of wine. It was Aunt Martha. She was my father's older sister, 68 years old, and the only member of my extended family who possessed a shred of genuine empathy. She had always been the black sheep because she refused to play the game. She didn't smile. She didn't offer a pleasantry. She just pulled me out of my chair with a surprising, desperate strength, dragging me away from the string quartet and into the bright, sterile kitchen. The heavy swinging door shut behind us, cutting off the music. The hum of the oversized refrigerator was the only sound. "Chloe, sweetheart," she whispered. She didn't let go of my wrist. She looked over my shoulder, staring at the little glass window in the kitchen door to make sure no one had followed us. "Aunt Martha, what's wrong? You're hurting my arm." She loosened her grip but didn't let go. Her eyes were wide, tracing the lines of my face. "You've given enough to this house," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You have paid your dues. I see how they look at you. I see what he does." I offered a confused, nervous laugh. "I'm fine, Aunt Martha. Really. I'm taking care of myself now." "Listen to me," she hissed, stepping closer. The smell of her peppermint gum and stale coffee washed over me. "Lock down your life. Do you hear me? Lock everything down. Be very, very careful." The smile fell completely off my face. "Careful of what, Aunt Martha? What do you know?" She didn't answer. She just looked at me. It wasn't pity in her eyes. It was a deep, chilling forewarning. It was the look you give someone standing on the train tracks when you can hear the whistle but they can't. She let go of my wrist, turned on her heel, and pushed back through the swinging door, disappearing into the crowd. I stood alone in the bright kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly sounding like a countdown. 4 days later, on a Wednesday morning, the earth opened up and swallowed me. I was sitting at my desk at Omnitech, surrounded by the comforting rhythmic clatter of keyboards and the low hum of the air conditioning. I was deep into reviewing a massive set of quarterly analytics. My screens were filled with neat, orderly rows of numbers. Everything made sense. Everything was in its proper place. Then my phone buzzed against the hard surface of my desk. It was a single email notification. The sender was Lone Star Fidelity. The subject line read, "Transaction confirmation. Wire transfer processed." I stared at the screen, my hand freezing over my mouse. Phishing attempts that mimicked banks were common. As a data analyst, I saw them all the time. I reached out to swipe the notification away and delete it, but my eyes caught the preview text beneath the subject line. Account ending in 8842. That was the last 4 digits of my private solo high-yield savings account, the account nobody knew about. A cold, heavy stone dropped into my stomach. I picked up the phone. My thumb hovered over the banking app. I tapped it. The Face ID ring appeared, spinning in a little circle. It seemed to take hours to recognize my face. Please, I thought, a desperate, irrational prayer forming in my mind. Just be a glitch. A system error. It happens all the time. The dashboard loaded. The screen was bright white. Checking. 42,110. High yield savings. $0. For a full 30 seconds, my lungs simply stopped working. The ambient noise of the busy office around me, the ringing phones, the chatter, the humming servers, faded into a dull rushing roar, like I was suddenly underwater. I stared at the single horrifying digit, 0. My brain violently rejected the information. It's a display error. The servers are updating. My thumb trembled as I dragged the screen down to refresh it. The little loading wheel spun again. 0. I refreshed it a third time, pressing so hard I thought the glass might crack. 0. 6 years of my life. 6 years of worn-out shoes, skipped vacations, freezing apartments, and absolute discipline. Gone. Wiped completely clean. I grabbed my desk phone, knocking over my coffee mug in the process. Dark brown liquid spilled across my reports, but I didn't care. I dialed Lone Star Fidelity's fraud line. The automated menu voice droned on, telling me my call was important, forcing me to press number after number while my heart hammered a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. I was shaking so badly the heavy plastic receiver slipped out of my hand twice. Finally, the hold music stopped with a sharp click. Lone Star Fidelity Fraud and Resolution. My name is Marcus. How can I assist you today? His voice was polite, clinical, and completely bored. My money, I gasped out. My throat felt like it was filled with sand. My savings account. It's at 0. There's been a mistake. A massive mistake. I can certainly look into that for you, ma'am. Can I have your account number and verify your identity? I rattled off the information, barely able to breathe. I heard the clacking of his keyboard on the other end. Every second stretched into an eternity. All right, Miss Bennett, Marcus said, his tone shifting from bored to professional caution. I am looking at the account now. I can confirm that a wire transfer of $155 was processed yesterday afternoon. The funds were moved from your savings account to an external, third-party escrow account. No, I practically screamed, not caring if my coworkers heard me. I didn't authorize that. That account is in my name only. Stop the transfer. Reverse it. Ma'am, please lower your voice, Marcus said smoothly. The transaction has already cleared the holding phase. And according to our system logs, the transaction was fully authenticated. Authenticated? By who? I was at work. I didn't sign anything. There was a pause on the line. The silence felt heavy, suffocating. Yes, Miss Bennett. It is an individual account. But our security records show the transaction was initiated from a trusted device historically associated with your online banking profile. The transfer was confirmed via two-factor authentication, and an electronic signature was applied. I didn't sign anything, I repeated, my voice breaking into a terrified whisper. The system logs show the secondary security questions were answered correctly to bypass the standard SMS code, Marcus continued, reading from his screen with brutal efficiency. The authorization was routed to a verified backup method. Would you like me to email you the transaction dossier? Yes, I choked out. I slammed the phone down. I couldn't breathe. The walls of the office felt like they were shrinking. I stood up, my legs feeling like lead, and walked out of my cubicle. I didn't look at anyone. I took the elevator down to the underground parking garage, because I knew I was going to hyperventilate, and I couldn't let my team see me shatter. I reached my 8-year-old Toyota. The Texas heat had turned the inside of the car into a boiling oven. I didn't turn on the engine. I just sat in the stifling heat, sweat immediately beading on my forehead, and opened my phone. The email from the bank had arrived. I opened the attached PDF dossier. There it was, my name neatly typed out on an electronic signature line. The destination was an escrow account for a commercial real estate firm, but it was the second page that made the blood freeze in my veins. Despite the suffocating heat of the car, it was the security bypass log. Someone hadn't just guessed a password. Someone had logged into my account via a web browser and triggered a manual override. To do that, they had to answer my extremely specific security questions. Question 1. What was the name of your first-grade teacher? Answer provided, Mrs. Gable. Question 2. What was the name of the street you lived on in 1995? Answer provided, Mockingbird Lane. I dropped the phone onto the passenger seat. I covered my mouth with both hands to muffle the raw, agonizing sob that ripped out of my throat. A stranger couldn't know those things. A Russian hacker wouldn't know the name of the woman who taught me how to read, or the street where I learned how to ride a bicycle. Only a parent would know those answers. My father hadn't just stolen my money, he had weaponized my childhood memories to pick the lock on my future. I sat in the boiling heat of my car for what felt like hours, though the clock on the dashboard told me it had only been 10 minutes. The Texas sun beat down through the windshield, baking the air inside until it was thick and hard to breathe. The steering wheel burned my palms when I gripped it. I needed the physical pain to anchor me. I needed something real to hold on to, because my mind was free-falling through a dark, endless tunnel. I am a data analyst. My entire career is built on finding the logical path from point A to point B. But looking at the screen of my phone, staring at the forensic proof of my own father hacking into my life, there was no logic. There was only a devastating, system-wide collapse of everything I thought I knew about my family. My hands shook as I opened my contacts. I tapped his name. The phone rang. Once. Twice. He answered on the second ring. "Chloe," my father said. His voice was perfectly steady. There was no hesitation. No guilt. No surprise. Just a calm, authoritative acknowledgement. Exactly like the tone he used when he was approving a loan at his bank. He sounded like a man who had already solved a problem and was simply waiting for the paperwork to be filed. "Dad," I said. My voice was a broken, raspy croak. "My savings. All of it." "Yes," he replied smoothly. I could hear the faint sound of a television playing in the background of their living room. "The wire cleared this morning. I was expecting your call." The casualness of his response felt like a physical blow. I gasped for air in the stifling heat of the car. "How did you get in?" "I took you off that account years ago. I sat in the bank and signed the papers." He sighed. It was the exact same, heavy, disappointed sigh he used to give me when I couldn't solve a math problem at the kitchen table in middle school. "You left your old silver iPad at the house 3 years ago, Chloe, when you came over for Thanksgiving," he explained patiently, as if teaching a child a simple lesson. "You thought it was broken because the screen was cracked, but it still turned on, and it was still logged in as a trusted device on your banking profile." My stomach lurched. The old iPad, the one I hadn't thought about in years. "I knew your security questions," he continued, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "Mrs. Gable, Mockingbird Lane. It wasn't a complicated puzzle, sweetheart. You never updated your backup recovery options after you removed me from the main account. The system sent the bypass code right to the iPad." He had exploited a technical loophole and his own paternal knowledge to break into my private vault. He had treated my life savings like an unlocked safe. "Why?" I screamed, hitting the burning steering wheel with my fist. "Why would you do this to me?" "Mason was in serious trouble," he said, and for the first time his voice hardened into something defensive. His East Austin investment fell through completely. He was leveraged to the hilt. He owed private lenders $135,000, Chloe. "So you stole my money to pay his debts?" "They were dangerous people," my father snapped, his banker persona finally cracking to reveal the desperate father underneath. "They were going to ruin him. They were going to take him to court, garnish his wages for the rest of his life, and maybe do worse." He was terrified. I had to help him. "I am his father." "You are my father too," I sobbed, the tears finally overflowing, burning my cheeks. "That was my house. That was 6 years of my life. I ate ramen noodles while he bought expensive suits. That was everything I had." "It is family money," he corrected, his tone turning ice cold. "I put Mason's future first. I wired the funds directly to an escrow account to settle his debts with the lenders." He paused, and the next words he spoke felt like a knife twisting in my ribs. "I used the remaining $20,000 to secure a lease on a new safe apartment for him in the Domain," he added. "He needs a fresh start to get back on his feet." I stopped crying. The tears literally dried in my eyes. He hadn't just paid off a dangerous debt to save his son's life. He had taken the extra money, my hard-earned money, to buy Mason a luxury apartment. Through the phone I heard a muffled voice in the background. It was my mother. Her voice was high-pitched and frantic. "Tell her it's for the family, William. Tell her God will bless her for her sacrifice." "Chloe, listen to me," my father said, shifting back into the man in charge. "You can still buy a house. You have a fantastic job at a tech company. You're smart. You'll earn it back in no time. Mason doesn't have your resilience. He needs support. I raised you for 18 years. I fed you, clothed you, paid for your braces, and put a roof over your head. This is what family does. We share the burden. I needed that money more than you did." As he spoke those words, the panic inside me vanished. The terrified, obedient daughter I had been for 34 years simply stopped existing. In her place Something cold, crystalline, and razor-sharp settled into my chest. I looked at the data. I looked at the facts. "You hacked my account, Dad," I said. My voice was no longer shaking. It was dead flat. Silence on the line. "You bypassed my security protocols," I continued, staring blankly at the concrete wall of the parking garage. "You forged my electronic signature on a wire transfer authorization form. I did not approve that transfer." I heard a sharp intake of breath on his end. "What you did," I said, every word dripping with absolute certainty, "is a federal felony. You are overreacting," my father scoffed, though I could hear the faint tremor of uncertainty creeping into his voice. "You wouldn't dare do anything to your own father. Stop being hysterical." I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I just pulled the phone away from my ear, pressed the red button, and ended the call. I sat in the blistering heat of the car, the silence wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. I had been audited, drained, and discarded. But my father had forgotten one crucial detail. He had taught me how to track the numbers, and now, I was going to use those numbers to tear his world apart. That Wednesday night, I didn't go home and cry. I had done all the crying I was going to do. The obedient daughter who wanted her parents' approval had died in the sweltering heat of that parking garage. What walked into my dark, drafty apartment was a data analyst with a singular, overriding objective: asset recovery. I turned on a single lamp in the living room. The yellow light cast long, cold shadows across the scuffed floorboards. I opened my laptop, pulled up my contact list, and found David Foster. David and I had been friends since college. We used to study in the campus library until 2 a.m., surviving on cheap coffee and sheer panic. Now he was a senior associate at a mid-sized law firm in downtown Austin, specializing entirely in white-collar financial fraud. I didn't call him as a friend. I called him as a client. He answered on the third ring. "Chloe? It's been months. Everything okay?" His voice was warm, filled with the easy familiarity of an old friend. "David," I said, my voice eerily calm in the quiet room, "I need you to switch gears. I need a lawyer." The warmth vanished from his tone instantly, replaced by the sharp, focused energy of a predator in a courtroom. "I'm listening. Walk me through the timeline." I laid it all out. I didn't let my voice shake. I gave him the raw data. The missing 155, 420, and finally the confession on the phone. My father admitting he wired the money to a commercial escrow account to pay off Mason's private lenders and secure a luxury apartment. When I finished, the silence on the line was incredibly heavy. I could hear the faint scratch of David's pen on a legal pad. "Chloe, listen to me very carefully," David finally said, his lawyer persona fully activated. Every word was clipped and precise. "This isn't just a family dispute. This is severe. If your father used an old device to bypass security, answered your private security questions without authorization, and forged an electronic signature to initiate a wire transfer, that is a textbook violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. It is federal wire fraud, and it is aggravated identity theft." "I know," I whispered, rubbing my temples. A dull headache was pulsing behind my eyes. "But I don't want to send my father to federal prison, David. I just want my house back." "You might not have a choice if you want that money," David replied, his tone intensely urgent. "Here is the critical mechanical issue. Under Regulation E, you legally have 60 days to report unauthorized transactions to the bank. But practically, in the real world," he paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. "The money was wired to a commercial escrow account," he explained. Escrow is a waiting room. The moment Mason signs those closing documents with his landlord and his lenders, that escrow account unlocks. The funds will be distributed to multiple third-party accounts. Once it scatters, recovering it takes years of brutal, expensive litigation. You will likely never see a cent of it again. I looked at the clock on my microwave, glowing green numbers in the dark. 9:15 p.m. "It's Wednesday night," I said, my heart rate accelerating. "The wire cleared the bank this morning." "Exactly," David said. "Mason is probably scheduled to sign the final paperwork by Friday morning before the weekend. If we don't force the bank to freeze that destination escrow account in the next 24 hours, you lose. But the bank won't freeze a cleared wire just because you called and complained. They think you authorized it. We need undeniable, forensic proof of the unauthorized access to force their hand." "Digital forensics," I breathed out. The path forward was suddenly clear. "Yes. Do you know anyone who can pull the raw data logs from your banking portal? We need to prove the login didn't originate from you." "I do," I said. "I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark, listening to the wind rattle the loose window panes, watching the clock tick closer to morning. Every hour felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. Thursday morning, 7 a.m. I was standing in the break room at Omnitech, waiting. Sarah Jenkins walked in, holding a massive thermos of black coffee. She was the lead digital forensics specialist at the firm. We had worked together on massive data integrity projects, hunting down corporate leaks and system breaches. She was brilliant, ruthless with data, and I trusted her with my life. She took one look at my face and stopped dead in her tracks. I looked like a corpse. My eyes were bloodshot, my skin pale, my clothes slightly rumpled from sitting in the exact same position all night. "Sarah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I need a massive personal favor. Off the books, right now." She didn't ask questions. She put down her coffee, grabbed my arm and walked me down the hall into her secure windowless office. She locked the heavy door behind us. "Show me," she said, sitting at her massive desk with 3 separate monitors. I didn't just show her the email from the bank. I logged into my Lone Star Fidelity portal, and using my administrative privileges, I granted her temporary developer access to my security dashboard. "I need the raw login session logs," I told her, standing right behind her chair. "I need you to prove exactly where the authentication originated. Prove it wasn't me." Sarah didn't say a word. Her fingers flew across her mechanical keyboard. The clack-clack-clack of the keys sounded like gunfire in the quiet room. Lines of code, IP addresses, and encrypted data strings scrolled rapidly across her vertical monitor. The tension in the room was suffocating. I held my breath, watching the blinking cursor tear through the digital footprint my father thought he had hidden. Within 45 minutes, she stopped typing. She leaned closer to the screen, her eyes narrowing. "Chloe, look at this," she said softly, pointing the tip of her pen at a highlighted string of code. "Here is your baseline login history for the last 6 months. Your iPhone, your work laptop, clean, consistent IP addresses." She dragged the mouse down. "But look at this session from Sunday at 2:15 a.m., she continued, her voice tightening. "The authentication device registers as an Apple iPad, running an iOS version that is 3 years out of date. The IP address isn't just different from yours. I ran a trace on the internet service provider." She tapped a few keys and pulled up a digital map. A red pin dropped onto the screen. "It pings directly to a residential node in Round Rock," Sarah said, looking up at me. "Your parents' neighborhood." I gripped the back of her chair to keep my knees from buckling. "It gets worse," she whispered, her eyes full of horrific realization. She clicked back to the raw log. "Look at the security question gateway. The system logs show 3 consecutive failed attempts at your security questions. They tried 3 different answers before they got Gable right on the 4th try. Then, the electronic signature was manually appended." She turned around in her chair to face me. "Chloe, this is undeniable, irrefutable forensic proof of unauthorized access. Whoever did this sat in that house, guessed your security questions until they broke the lock, and stole your identity. I need this in a formalized report," I said, my voice hollow and distant, "with your professional credentials and the firm's watermark attached. Immediately." Sarah hit the print command without breaking eye contact. The laser printer in the corner hummed to life, spitting out the warm pages that would officially label my father a criminal. "I'll sign it right now," Sarah said, gathering the papers and binding them in a heavy black folder. She handed it to me, her expression softening into deep, painful empathy. "Chloe, I am so incredibly sorry." I took the folder. It felt heavier than a brick. It was the weapon I was going to use to burn my family to the ground. Armed with the heavy black folder containing Sarah's forensic report, I sat alone in my dark apartment that Thursday night. I had exactly 12 hours before the escrow account was likely to close on Friday morning. The glowing screen of my laptop was the only light in the room. I opened the old spreadsheet, the ledger. I stared at the bright red rows detailing the $100,000 I had willingly bled for them over the years. Then I looked down at the printed forensic report resting on my lap, the digital footprints of my father picking the lock to my future. My phone lit up on the coffee table, vibrating violently against the wood. The screen flashed a single word: "Mom." My heart did a familiar, terrified flutter. For 34 years, that name on my screen meant I was about to be asked for something I couldn't afford to give. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the cool air fill my lungs, and swiped to answer. "Chloe, thank God," Mom's voice came through, breathless and frantic. There was no greeting, no warmth, just immediate, overwhelming panic. Your father told me you threatened him. Sweetheart, you need to calm down and understand the situation. You're not thinking clearly. I closed my eyes. I could picture her standing in her expensive kitchen, twisting a dish towel in her hands, perfectly playing the role of the distressed peacemaker. Mom, my voice was flat, empty of the daughter she was expecting. I need Dad to reverse the wire. He needs to call the escrow company and return the money by 8 a.m. tomorrow. There was a sharp, unnatural pause on the line. I could hear her breathing shift. All of it, I continued, staring at the dark window. $155,420.85. If it is not back in my account by morning, I am walking into the Austin Police Department. I am filing a report for felony wire fraud and identity theft. Chloe, my mother shrieked. The sweet pleading facade dropped instantly, replaced by a vicious defensive anger. You can't do that to your own father. We sacrificed everything for you. I carried you for 9 months. We gave you life. How can you be so utterly incredibly selfish? He hacked my account, Mom, I said, my grip tightening on the phone. He used an old device. He answered my security questions. He stole my identity. This is a federal crime. It's not stealing if it's family, she yelled, her voice echoing sharply in my quiet living room. You were going to waste all that money on an empty, useless house when your brother's life was literally falling apart. Mason was in danger. Your father made an executive decision for the good of this family. He made a choice to be a criminal, I replied coldly. Now I'm making mine. Chloe, please. She suddenly resorted to the tears. It was a rapid, dizzying shift. The heavy, gasping sobs that used to control me like a puppet on a string filled my ear. Think about what you're doing to us. You'll destroy this family. He could go to prison. He's an old man. Do you want your own father locked in a cage? The guilt tried to rise in my throat, a thick, choking feeling. But then I thought about Aunt Martha pulling me into the kitchen, warning me. I thought about 6 years of eating cheap food and driving a broken car in the freezing cold. I thought about the house with the wraparound porch, and the sunlight hitting the oak floors. I'm not destroying anything, Mom, I said softly. A single tear rolled down my cheek, hot and stinging. I'm just letting the consequences of his actions catch up to him. For the first time in my entire life, I am choosing me. I hung up. Before she could call back, I opened her contact profile and pressed block. Then I did the same for my father. And Mason. It felt like cutting off a limb to save myself from an infection. Friday morning, 9 a.m. The Austin Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit was freezing cold. It smelled like stale black coffee and strong floor wax. I sat in a hard plastic chair across from Detective Laura Hayes. She was a woman in her late 50s with sharp, tired eyes. She looked like someone who hadn't been surprised by human depravity in 20 years. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I acted like a senior data analyst presenting a failed corporate audit. I laid the meticulously organized binder onto her metal desk. Here is the digital forensic report tracing the unauthorized login IP address to my father's house, I said, my voice steady. Here are the banking logs showing the failed security questions. Here is my financial history with my family, and the forged authorization forms for the wire transfer. Detective Hayes didn't say a word. She opened the binder. For 15 agonizing minutes, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the wall clock and the rustle of paper as she turned the pages. I watched her face, looking for a micro-expression, a hint of doubt. But her face was unreadable. When she finally looked up, her eyes were razor-sharp. Miss Bennett, Detective Hayes said, her voice low and serious. You've handed me a fully wrapped case. This easily meets the criteria for identity theft under Texas Penal Code 32.51 and wire fraud under federal statutes. The forensic proof of the IP address and the failed security attempts proves malicious intent and unauthorized access. A massive breath shuddered out of my lungs. Someone believed me. What happens now? I asked. My lawyer said we need to freeze the escrow account today, before my brother signs the lease. I'm already on it, Detective Hayes said, picking up her heavy desk phone. I'm calling Lone Star Fidelity's fraud department right now, and I will fax them this preliminary police report. With an active criminal investigation number attached, they are legally obligated to freeze the destination funds immediately, pending a full investigation. She typed rapidly on her keyboard, printing out a form and sliding it across the desk. Case number 2024, AUS 459, you've officially alleged a felony against your father. She paused, looking at me. Her tough expression softened just a fraction. I investigate a lot of fraud, Miss Bennett. Family cases are always the ugliest. They will try to tear you apart. They will call you crazy. Are you prepared for the fallout? My father made his choice, I said, staring at the case number. I'm just providing the receipt. I stood up to leave, finally feeling a tiny sliver of hope. But as I grabbed my purse, Detective Hayes frowned. She leaned closer to her computer monitor, her eyes narrowing at the screen. Miss Bennett. Wait. The tone of her voice made my blood run instantly cold. I froze, my hand still on the strap of my bag. What is it? Detective Hayes sighed heavily, rubbing the bridge of her nose. When I ran your social security number through the national database to file the initial report, a red flag just popped up. A flag. There is a personal loan, she said, looking up at me with deep grim sympathy. A high-interest loan for $30,000. It was opened 8 months ago, entirely in your name, issued directly to an address in Round Rock. I gripped the edge of her metal desk. The room started spinning again, the fluorescent lights buzzing loudly in my ears. No, I whispered. No, I never applied for a loan. I save everything. I have zero debt. Detective Hayes turned the monitor slightly so I could see the screen. Then we are no longer looking at a one-time desperate mistake, Chloe. We are looking at multiple systematic counts of identity theft. The family fallout was instantaneous, and it was nuclear. The moment Detective Hayes faxed the police report and the escrow account was legally frozen, stopping Mason's payoffs and his luxury lease, my phone erupted. It started with text messages. You miserable brat, Mason texted. You're dead to me. You just ruined my life. Then came the voicemails from cousins and aunts I hadn't spoken to in years. They screamed into my phone, calling me a psychotic, ungrateful daughter. They didn't know the facts. They only knew the story my father had quickly spun to control the damage. I sat on my faded couch, listening to the messages in the dark. The revelation of the $30,000 loan had changed everything. It meant my father hadn't acted out of a sudden desperate panic to save Mason. He had been quietly harvesting my identity for months. I wasn't just his emergency fund. I was his personal line of credit. Saturday morning my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I answered it. I've heard what you did, my father said. His voice was absolute ice. The polished bank manager was gone. This was the voice of a man backed into a corner. The escrow company called. The accounts are locked. You actually went to the police. You committed identity theft, Dad, I said, my voice eerily calm. What did you expect? I expected loyalty, he barked, the sound cracking sharply through the phone. I expected you to remember who raised you. You gave me guilt, I replied, staring at the blank wall of my apartment. I earned everything else myself. You think the police will believe you over me? He let out a harsh, unnatural laugh. I am a respected bank manager. I have connections in this city. I know judges, Chloe. You're just a hysterical. I am a senior data analyst, I interrupted, cutting through his lie with cold hard facts. I have forensic proof. I have the IP address logs tracing the hack directly to your living room at 2:15 a.m. I have the record of you failing my security questions 3 times. The police already have the binder. The FBI might be next, considering wire fraud across state lines is a federal offense. Total, suffocating silence fell over the line. I could hear his ragged breathing. And Dad, I added, my voice dropping to a whisper. They also found the $30,000 loan you took out in my name 8 months ago. The silence deepened into something resembling sheer terror. I'm giving you one last chance, he finally hissed, his voice shaking. Drop the charges. Tell them you were confused. We can fix this quietly. The only thing that needed fixing was my boundaries, I said. Consider them fixed. I hung up. A few hours later, I opened my laptop and saw the Facebook post. Mason had created an event page before his accounts were frozen, and in his sheer arrogance he hadn't taken it down. Housewarming party. The bold text read, Come celebrate my new place in the domain. Saturday, October 15th, 7 p.m. Can't wait to show you what hard work and smart investing can achieve. Over 55 people had RSVP'd. Extended family, his college fraternity brothers, his co-workers. My parents were listed as the co-hosts. Mason was literally throwing an extravagant party to celebrate a life bought with my stolen savings, completely oblivious to the fact that his money was currently locked inside a police investigation. I wasn't invited, but I saw Aunt Martha had commented, Lovely apartment, Mason. Where did you find the down payment? Mason had replied, Family helped out. You know how it is. I knew exactly how it was. The party was in exactly 1 week. On Wednesday, Detective Hayes called me. Lone Star Fidelity's internal cyber team validated your friend's forensic report, she said, her tone strictly professional. The device fingerprint undeniably matches your father's location. The transaction is officially classified as unauthorized fraud. The money in the escrow account will be routed back to you within 30 days. I breathed out, a heavy sob catching in my throat. The crushing weight on my chest finally lifted. Thank God. We are moving forward with the arrest warrant for William Bennett, she continued, the sound of keyboard clicking in the background. Given his banking connections, he is a flight risk. We want to execute the warrant soon. Do you know his current whereabouts for Saturday evening? I looked at the brightly colored Facebook invitation glowing on my monitor. The practical, quiet choice was to let the police arrest him at his suburban home on a random Tuesday morning. But I thought about Mason's post, hard work and smart investing. I thought about my parents standing there, soaking in the praise of 55 people, performing their perfect lie while I sat alone in a freezing apartment. They wanted an audience. Detective, I said slowly, the data falling into place. I know exactly where he will be on Saturday at 7:30 p.m. 4102 Domain Drive, Apartment 7B. He'll be surrounded by family. I'll be there too. If you want him, that's where he'll be. Understood, she said. Saturday, October 15th, 7 p.m. I didn't sneak in. I walked right through the heavy oak front door of Mason's luxury apartment. The place was massive, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the glittering Austin skyline. The air smelled of expensive champagne and catered hors d'oeuvres. 55 guests were packed into the living room, laughing over the heavy thump of a bass track playing on a high-end sound system. My father was holding court near the massive marble kitchen island. I've always believed in investing in family, he announced loudly, holding a crystal glass, surrounded by a group of my uncles. When Mason came to me with this real estate strategy, I knew it was the right move. We set our children up for success. Impressive, William, Uncle Robert from New York said, clapping my dad on the back. I walked into the center of the room. I wore a sharp black blazer, carrying the heavy black folder Sarah had given me. The music was loud, but as I moved through the crowd, people started noticing me. The whispers rippled outward like a wave. My mother saw me first. Her face instantly drained of blood, turning a sickly ashen gray. She dropped a white cocktail napkin on the floor. Chloe, she hissed, marching quickly toward me, her eyes darting nervously around the room. What are you doing here? You need to leave immediately. It's a family party, Mom, I said smoothly. I'm family. Mason spotted me. He pushed his way through his friends, his face flushed with anger and alcohol. Are you psycho? Get out of my house. It's not your house, Mason, I said. I didn't yell, but my voice carried a sharp, piercing clarity that cut through the music. Several people nearby stopped talking. You don't own it. In fact, the lease fell through on Thursday. Did the landlord not call you? The escrow account is frozen. The room went dead silent. Someone reached over and turned off the music. The sudden quiet was heavy and unbearable. My father stomped over, his face turning a dark, dangerous purple. He grabbed my arm, digging his fingers in painfully, trying to pull me toward the door. You are making a scene. Get out before I throw you out. I yanked my arm away with everything I had. Tell them, Dad, I demanded, my voice finally rising, echoing off the high ceilings. Tell Uncle Robert how Mason afforded this place. Tell them how you used an old iPad at 2:15 in the morning to hack into my private savings account. Tell them how you failed my security questions 3 times, forged my signature, and wired $155,000 to pay off his loan sharks. Gasps echoed around the luxury room. Uncle Robert stepped back, looking at my father with wide eyes. William? What on earth is she talking about? She's mentally unwell, my father shouted. He was sweating now, his eyes wide with a frantic, cornered panic. She's off her medication. Don't listen to this garbage. Am I? I pulled the thick forensic report and the APD case file from my bag and slammed it onto the pristine marble kitchen island. The heavy smack made my mother flinch. Here is the digital forensic report tracing the IP address to your living room. Here is the police report. And here is the documentation for the $30,000 fraudulent loan you took out in my name. Aunt Martha stepped forward from the shocked crowd. She looked at my father with utter disgust. I warned you, William. You flew too close to the sun. Before my father could scream another lie, a heavy, authoritative knock hammered on the apartment door. 3 loud, distinct strikes. Mason, looking completely bewildered and terrified, opened it mechanically. 3 Austin Police Department officers stood in the hallway. 2 were in full uniform, resting their hands on their utility belts. Detective Hayes stood between them in plain clothes, holding a folded piece of paper. "William Bennett?" Detective Hayes said, stepping into the bright luxury apartment. The crowd physically parted like the Red Sea. No one breathed. "What is the meaning of this?" My father sputtered, backing away until his waist hit the marble counter. "This is a private residence. You have no right. William Bennett, you are under arrest for felony wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and forgery under Texas and federal statutes," Detective Hayes said. Her voice was pure steel. She signaled the uniformed officers. They moved fast. They grabbed my father's arms, twisting him around and forcing his hands behind his back. The sharp metallic snick-snick of the handcuffs locking into place was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my freedom. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say," the officer began. My mother screamed. It wasn't her usual manipulative cry. It was a genuine harrowing scream of sheer terror. She lunged forward, grabbing the officer's arm. "Stop. He's a bank manager. You're making a mistake. We are good people. Ma'am, step back immediately, or you will be charged with interfering with an arrest," the second officer warned, putting a hand out to block her. Mason stood completely frozen. His champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering into 100 glittering pieces on the hardwood floor. "Dad?" he whimpered, sounding like a scared little boy. "What's going on?" My father, his immaculate suit rumpled, his dignity entirely evaporated, was marched toward the door. As he passed me, he stopped pulling against the officers for just a second. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You destroyed us," he spat. "No," I replied, staring him dead in the eyes, my heart finally steady. "I just audited you." After they hauled him out into the hallway, Detective Hayes lingered for a moment. She looked around at the 55 horrified guests staring at her. "For those wondering," she announced clearly, "the funds used to secure this property were stolen via identity theft. Have a good evening." She walked out, shutting the door behind her. The silence that followed in the apartment was apocalyptic. Uncle Robert slowly turned to Mason, his face a mask of absolute chilling disgust. "You bought this place with your sister's stolen money." "I didn't know," Mason cried out, tears welling in his eyes. He pointed a shaking finger at the door. "Dad said she wanted to help. He said it was family money. She just showed up with a police report, Mason," Aunt Martha yelled, her voice dripping with venom. "Does that look like she wanted to help?" People started grabbing their coats off the guest bed. They couldn't get out of the apartment fast enough. Mason's co-workers left without making eye contact. The fraternity brothers vanished. Within 20 minutes, a loud, vibrant party of 55 people was reduced to 5. Me, Mom, Mason, Aunt Martha, and Uncle Robert. My mother collapsed onto the expensive white leather couch, weeping uncontrollably into her hands. My husband is in jail." "Your husband is a thief, Susan," Uncle Robert said coldly. He grabbed his small suitcase near the door. "I flew from New York to celebrate a criminal. I am done with this family." He walked out, slamming the heavy door behind him. I looked at Mason, who was on his knees, staring blankly at the shattered glass on the floor. "The bank froze the funds, Mason," I told him, picking up my empty black bag. "You don't have this apartment. You still owe those lenders. I suggest you start packing tonight." I didn't wait for his response. I didn't look back at my mother. I walked out the door, took the elevator down to the street, and stepped out into the cool Texas night. The city lights twinkled above me, and for the first time in my entire life, the air tasted clean. The legal aftermath was brutal, mechanical, and swift. I hired David Foster to represent my civil interests, and he was relentless. The district attorney hit my father with multiple federal charges, facing up to 25 years in federal prison, and knowing Sarah's digital forensics were absolutely bulletproof, my father's high-priced defense attorney forced him to take a plea deal. In late November, William Bennett stood before a judge and pleaded guilty. He received 24 months of supervised probation, 250 hours of community service, and a strict court order for full restitution. The $30,000 fraudulent loan was wiped from my credit report, legally flagged as identity theft. 1 week later, $155 $420.85 reappeared in a brand new ultra-secure account at a completely different banking institution. The numbers on my screen looked the same, but the money felt entirely different now. It was no longer just savings. It was a monument to my survival. Mason lost the apartment immediately. The private lenders sued him, and without my father's stolen cash to protect him, Mason was forced to declare bankruptcy. His reputation in Austin's real estate market was annihilated. My mother retreated into total isolation in her suburban home. She was too deeply ashamed to face her church group or her wealthy neighbors after the local news printed a small damning brief about a former bank manager indicted for familial fraud. 6 months later, in the warm, breezy days of April, I sat at a large mahogany table at a title company in Cedar Park. I was handed a pen, and I signed the final page of a massive stack of documents. Purchase price, $820,000. Down payment, $160,000. I took the heavy brass keys, drove out to the suburbs, and walked up the steps of my new house. I stood on the wraparound porch, breathing in the scent of pine trees and fresh air. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house was completely empty. It smelled of fresh paint, lemon cleaner, and old warm wood. The afternoon sunlight spilled across the original oak floors. I walked into the center of the living room, sat down on the bare floorboards, and pulled my knees to my chest. I cried until my ribs physically ached. But I wasn't crying out of sadness, or grief, or betrayal. I cried out of pure, overwhelming, terrifying liberation. The walls were mine. The floor was mine. No one could ever tell me I was selfish here. I am writing this from a rocking chair on that same porch now. The sun is setting, painting the Texas sky in shades of deep orange and purple. Aunt Martha is coming over later for dinner. She is the only family member I still speak to. The rest of them, my mother, my father, my brother, are blocked, deleted and excised from my life like a toxic code removed from a clean system. I used to believe that loving your family meant setting yourself on fire just to keep them warm. I thought setting a boundary was an act of betrayal. I was wrong. Sometimes the most deeply loving thing you can do for yourself is to step back, let go, and allow the people who use you to face the absolute, unshielded consequences of their own actions. I chose myself. It was the most terrifying thing I have ever done. And as I look out over my garden, watching the blue hydrangeas sway in the evening breeze, I know it was worth every single tear. Stories like this one, raw, intense, and grounded in the terrifying truth of what it takes to survive our own blood, remind us why we have to protect our peace at all costs. If you felt the weight of this journey, if you found a piece of your own resilience echoed in these words, please take a moment to drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. We are building a space where the hardest truths are spoken and where survival is celebrated. Stay connected with us, because there are so many more powerful stories waiting to be told, and you won't want to miss what comes next.